Hello and welcome to this latest edition of Coffee with the Curator. I'm Debra Antoncic, the Director-Curator at RiverBrink. For this session, we're looking at the exhibition, Oh, the Places You'll Go. This was installed at RiverBrink just last fall, but just around the time when our attendance dropped off, and so not that many people were able to visit the exhibition following renewed concerns about the pandemic. So today is an opportunity for us to tour digitally, virtually, this exhibition. The idea behind the exhibition was to allow for some vicarious travel and to provide an opportunity for visitors to reflect on the experience of travel, one of the many things we are missing in this pandemic year. The title comes from the popular children's book of the same title, written and illustrated by Dr. Seuss. So we'll start with this work by Edwin Whitefield, a watercolor titled simply Montmorency, which sparks some personal memories for me of a trip to Quebec City and to Montmorency just outside of the city a few years ago. I made the trek to the top of the waterfall and enjoyed a very nice lunch on a restaurant patio with a lovely view out to the St. Lawrence. This watercolor is a different perspective, clearly taken from the bottom of the falls. But it has been, it's a popular perspective for artists to take, capturing this sailboat in the foreground and the lovely blue, clear water. We have two works by Whitefield in the collection, this watercolor and a colored lithograph, a print of London, Ontario. Whitefield published his original views of North American cities from 1845 to 1857, which included views of cities in the northern United States and also some from Ontario and Quebec, based on his time in the Canadas. His views were typically sold by advance subscription, with a few extra prints made available for retail sale in bookstores. Unlike this small watercolor, the published prints are very large and include detailed renderings of buildings, landmarks, and the landscape. Whitefield captured meticulous details in sketches made on site. Montmorency Falls is second only to Niagara Falls for attracting the attention of artists and tourists, a must-see destination in Canada. Watercolor is often used to create a preliminary sketch in advance of a finished painting, as Whitefield did, a practice that is well suited to painting out of doors. Watercolor is an appropriate medium for travel views due to the portability of the painting materials and its popularity as a means of recording both destinations and experiences. A small sketch pad has been an essential traveling companion at least since the late 18th century. It was a popular form of the tourist journal, taken up to record famous sites, landmarks, and picturesque views. Here we're looking at Hare Island, or Île aux Lièvres in French, in an island in the St. Lawrence River. It is currently uninhabited and today managed as a wildlife preserve. Watercolor is also a medium for topographical painting, for recording features of the landscape for military purposes, particularly for artillery. Topographical sketching likely provided the training for the artist of this work, which is attributed to C.N. Newdegate. It's one of 10 watercolors by the artist in the collection, the remainder mainly of Niagara Falls. Training in the taping of topographical views was essential preparation for military personnel. The Scottish-born painter George Heriot attended the Royal High School in Edinburgh and hoped for a career as an artist in London, but found himself in the military and enrolled at the Royal Military Academy at Woolwich. Heriot arrived in Canada in 1792 for a career in the civil service. Heriot's Untitled Landscape from 1820 is indicative of his well-known Canadian landscape works, which combine the use of pen and ink and watercolor over graphite. The exact location of this work is unknown, and it may even be imaginary since it has a kind of a Shangri-La look to it. This is one of several watercolors by watercolor sketches in the collection by Elizabeth Simcoe, the wife of John Graves Simcoe, the first Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada. An accomplished amateur painter and diarist, she was renowned for her detailed diary and pictures depicting life in early Upper Canada. The couple returned to England in 1796 after 5 years in the Canadas. The watercolor is undated, but we can perhaps assume it was created upon her return to England. The couple settled in Devon, not far from Barry Pomeroy. Barry Pomeroy Castle is a Tudor mansion within the walls of a castle in the village of Barry Pomeroy in South Devon, England. Built in the late 15th century, the castle was essentially a ruin until it became celebrated as a picturesque, romantic ruin and a popular tourist attraction. The castle was featured in early guidebooks, and it also has a reputation as being haunted. Moving across the continent, this lovely watercolor suggests an idyllic river cruise, another very pleasant touristic activity. The river is not specified, but Le Bourg was known for impressionistic views of waterways in France, particularly the Seine. Albert Charles Le Bourg, born in Montfort-sur-L'Île in France, entered the École des Beaux-Arts in Rouen with the hopes of studying architecture. He took painting lessons and traveled to Algiers and gradually came under the influence of Impressionism. By 1876, Le Bourg exhibited his works for the first time with Claude Monet, Alfred Seeley, and Pierre Auguste Renoir, well-known Impressionists, and displayed 30 works at the fourth and fifth Impressionist exhibitions of 1879 and 1880. Barges on the River depicts a waterway scene, one of the many canals which wound through ribbons of French countryside. It represents one of Le Bourg's most prominent and long-standing motifs. Spending his adult life in Rouen, a port city along the Seine, Le Bourg had an ever-changing landscape at his disposal. The small ports and harbors that began to emerge as a way to carry people and goods across to serve as a launching point for an afternoon leisure trip were all captured by the artist. The horizon line emphasizes the flatness of the landscape and places the viewer right at sea level, with a line of boats and barges and small sailboats, perhaps docked at one of the many ports along the river. Canal traffic using barges was an important means of shipping and transportation, but also for leisure. Watercolor, essentially pigment dissolved in a water-based solution, has a long history. It is typically applied with a brush onto a surface such as paper or fabric or vellum. Watercolor is often used in combination with gouache, as in this painting. Gouache is an opaque water-based paint bound by a colloid agent such as chalk. While watercolor is transparent, applied in thin washes of color, gouache typically affords a dense, saturated color with a matte finish. Gouache is also used in this way by Lucienne Jeannin, who captures lively scenes of Paris with spontaneity and charm. Here we're looking at a quintessential scene from Paris between the wars, a square in Montmartre that is very popular with tourists and still popular today. Popular with artists and a local site for tourists to explore. Local sites include the famous cabaret, the Lapin Agile, and other well-known landmarks. Jeannin was born in Rouen in 1894, received his initial artistic training at l'École des Beaux-Arts in Rouen, and then at the l'École des Arts Décoratifs in Paris. Jeannin worked in various media, from oils to watercolor to gouache and pastel and graphite. His style is evident in these three watercolors in the collection, Le Boulevard Saint-Denis, and another of the port in Marseille, in addition to the Place du Tertre à Montmartre. So 3 watercolors by the artist, capturing the lively scenes of Paris and the port of Marseille. The 3 works date to the 1930s and convey a sense of the bustling city and port between the wars. Jeanine enjoyed the life of a bohemian Parisian, and the scenes border on caricature. They might even have been popular souvenir purchases. And here I'm showing you a contemporary view of the gate of Saint-Denis, Port Saint-Denis, part of the original medieval wall that surrounded Paris. And here a view of the port at Marseille with the boats lined up along the quay. And I think you can get a sense of, almost a sense of caricature from the way that the figures are depicted here in the scene. And here I'm showing you an installation view of the room where the watercolors are installed at RiverBrink. Continuing with the theme of ports, here with this untitled watercolor by Soter Yaksa-Malachowski. Born in 1867 in Crimea, Yaksa-Malachowski began his artistic studies in Krakow and moved to Munich to study painting and drawing in 1897, where he was a member of the lively Polish community, the artistic community in Munich. In 1901, he married and returned to Poland and settled in Krakow. He made trips to Italy, painted Venice and Verona and Capri, and is known as the painter of 3 seas, the Black Sea, the Mediterranean, and the Baltic. Following World War I, Poland gained independence and access to the Baltic, long denied the landlocked protectorate. The coast drew artists to the ports and fishing boats and fishermen at work. The coast regained and reclaimed for Poland was a theme taken up by Yaksa-Malachowski, and his attention was also focused on the development of Gdynia as into a major port city. Much of this was destroyed and the Polish inhabitants dispersed or put in concentration camps during World War II. But after the war, the artist returned to the subject, again looking to the small fishing boats along the port and focusing on the lives of fishermen rather than the growing industrial port. Although there is extensive documentation of the acquisition of many of the works in the collection, in fact, most of the works, there are others for which we really have no information, no hint of why Sam Weir purchased the paintings or how he encountered the artist's work, and this is one example. Another example here, showing you a view of the watercolor as we have it hung just above the fireplace at RiverBrink. But another example of an artist whose work was acquired with very little documentation is this by Corin de Harutian, a US American. It's untitled, but known as the Pier at Provincetown. Born in Armenia, de Harutian lived through persecution and genocide under Turkish rule. He fled with his mother and siblings to Russia in 1915 and then to the United States in 1921. The family settled in the Armenian community in Worcester, Massachusetts, and Corin first studied painting at the School of the Worcester Art Museum. This watercolor was likely completed between 1928 to 29 before Corin began to work in sculpture. It is one of 3 watercolors by the artist in the collection. Provincetown is located on the extreme tip of Cape Cod, Massachusetts. In the 19th century, at the zenith of the town's commercial whaling and fishing industry, there were 52 wooden piers along the waterfront, such as this one. Provincetown has been a haven for artists since 1898 and one of the oldest art colonies in the United States, and a very popular tourist destination still today. Another work by Der Herutian, Untitled Goats Under Palm Trees from 1931, may have been completed during the artist's extended stay in Jamaica, where he traveled in the 1930s, intending to work on painting, but he became interested in sculpture, particularly carving in the native hardwoods. And it is at this point that Coren transitioned to be a sculptor, most of the work that he's known for today. But we have these lovely fresh watercolors still in the collection from his earlier work. This watercolor by Arthur Cox, the SS Victorian, Allen Line in the Mersey, Liverpool from 1910, is a reminder of travel by cruise ships. It depicts the first turbine-powered ocean liner, a triple screw North Atlantic liner, whose dizzying speed of 18 knots brought passengers from Montreal, Quebec, and St. John across the Atlantic to Liverpool. The ship was launched in Belfast in 1904. In 1921, she was chartered by the British government as a troop ship for India, and in 1922, having been renamed the Marlock, she served the Canadian Pacific Steamship Company on the Glasgow, Quebec, Montreal route. Arthur Cox emigrated to Canada from England, where he settled in Toronto, with a brief stint in Montreal from 1894 to 97. Cox was not an artist by trade or profession. Rather, he worked for the Great Western Telegraph Company, eventually securing the position of company secretary. He devoted his time exclusively to painting after 1902, focusing on watercolor and works in oil depicting landscapes from the Canadian Rockies, from the Muskokas, and the Grand Valley. This watercolor was a gift to the collection by David Murray and Elizabeth Surtees, so not one of Sam Weir's purchases. And finally, this view of Monhegan Island by Robert Ford Gagan, the Gully, Monhegan Island, Maine. The artist was born in London, England, and moved to Canada with his family in 1862, where they settled in Seaforth, Ontario. As an adult, Gagan moved to Toronto, where he established himself as a prominent Canadian landscape and seascape painter, who also served as educator, a leader in the artistic community, and a charter member of the Ontario Society of Artists and the Royal Canadian Academy of Arts. His primary medium was watercolor. However, his works in oil and hand-colored photographs are in numerous Canadian and international collections. Gagan is widely known as the painter of the sea, for his ability to capture the moment where water meets land and its various configurations, and for the play of water, open sky, and rocky outcroppings, all of which you see in this lovely watercolor. Monhegan Island, off the coast of Maine, very popular with artists and an artist colony there for some decades. The watercolor is one of two depictions of the island in the collection, the other a very nice, very lovely painting by Rockwell Kent. So to conclude, although we cannot be physically present, we can enjoy these views and anticipate a return to travel in the future by visiting this exhibition. Thank you for joining me.